The FIA breaks the silence and publicly announces that the dismissal of Christian Horner was illegal. Will Red Bull be forced to rehire Christian Horner? Will they have to compensate him? If you want to know the answer, stay until the end of the video. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The motorsport community continues to reel as the scandal surrounding Christian Horner's sudden and highly controversial removal from Red Bull Racing grows deeper, more complex, and more incendiary with every passing hour. What was once dismissed by some as a high-stakes internal reshuffling has now morphed into an international sporting and legal inferno, fueled by the FIA's unprecedented findings and damning declarations. The gravity of the FIA's latest statement cannot be overstated. Not only was Horner's dismissal irregular, but according to the organization's internal legal counsel, it was executed in direct contravention of multiple international sporting regulations, ethical frameworks, and labor laws recognized both within and beyond the jurisdiction of Formula One. This revelation has triggered a maelstrom of speculation, condemnation, and urgent calls for accountability from stakeholders across the sport. From rival teams to sponsors, from fan communities to legal analysts, and even from political observers who now see this case as emblematic of a broader power struggle at the very heart of Formula One's elite structures. Behind closed doors, the FIA reportedly launched what insiders are now calling the most comprehensive and aggressive internal investigation in the federation's recent history. The operation, shrouded in complete secrecy for over 40 days, involved not only the deployment of independent legal auditors, but also the recruitment of international ethics consultants and corporate governance experts. Confidential documents, including boardroom emails, non-disclosure agreements, employee testimonies, and financial logs, were all meticulously reviewed. This process culminated in a multi-chapter report so damning in its implications that even high-ranking FIA officials were said to be visibly shaken when the full scope of Red Bull's internal breakdown came to light. One official who spoke under condition of anonymity described the situation as a textbook example of corporate sabotage masquerading as executive reform, and hinted at ongoing pressure campaigns within Red Bull orchestrated to dismantle Horner's long-standing influence over both the racing and commercial arms of the team. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. At the core of the FIA's findings is the blatant disregard for the contractual and procedural mechanisms that are supposed to safeguard the stability of key executive roles in Formula One. Horner, whose tenure with Red Bull dates back to the team's very inception in 2005 and who oversaw multiple constructors' and drivers' championships, was apparently blindsided by the decision, having received no prior warning, no formal inquiry notice, and no opportunity to defend himself either publicly or internally. Sources familiar with the situation revealed that Horner's legal team has already filed an emergency petition with the International Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, seeking immediate injunctive relief and damages for what they describe as unlawful and malicious executive defenestration. The petition references over 30 contractual breaches, including violations of clauses specifically put in place after the 2021 Concord Agreement to protect high-level team principals from abrupt dismissal without cause. Among the most troubling aspects of the case is the alleged role played by internal dissenters within Red Bull Racing and Red Bull GmbH. Multiple reports suggest that a splinter faction of board members, many of whom were appointed in the wake of founder Dietrich Mateschitz' death, orchestrated a clandestine campaign to discredit and isolate Horner, viewing him as a relic of an older, less corporatized Red Bull era. These individuals, said to be aligned with newer marketing executives and external investors, allegedly coordinated a series of procedural irregularities designed to expedite Horner's exit before the 2025 season, possibly in an attempt to rebrand the team under a new leadership ethos. What they may not have anticipated, however, was the extent to which the FIA would view such actions as a threat not just to Red Bull's internal hierarchy, but to the structural integrity of the entire Formula One ecosystem. The consequences of the FIA's findings have already begun to ripple across the sport with frightening speed. Several major sponsors are reportedly reconsidering their partnerships with Red Bull, citing concerns over governance and reputational risk. Rival teams such as Mercedes and Ferrari have publicly called for a full independent review, with Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff stating that the implications of what the FIA has uncovered go beyond any one individual. This goes to the very heart of fairness, process, and respect in our sport. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Liberty Media is said to be in emergency talks with the FIA, fearing that the fallout could negatively impact Formula One's global brand just months before the highly anticipated 2026 regulation overhaul. Further complicating matters is the revelation that certain Red Bull drivers and engineering personnel were not only unaware of Horner's impending removal but were misled about the rationale behind it. One senior engineer reportedly resigned last week, citing irreconcilable ethical concerns and expressing dismay that the values of transparency and mutual respect had vanished overnight. Max Verstappen, the team's star driver and three-time world champion, has thus far remained silent publicly, but insiders claim that he has requested a private meeting with both FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem and Liberty Media's CEO Greg Maffei to better understand the implications of the scandal on his contractual future and competitive stability. Legal experts now warn that the ramifications of this case could set a precedent not just for Formula One but for all elite-level motorsport. The FIA's ruling, which cites violations of Executive Conduct Article 13.6.2 and multiple infractions of international labor compliance norms, may force teams to overhaul their executive management protocols. A senior attorney at a London-based sports law firm stated, "This case could redefine how F1 handles executive employment protection. If Horner wins his case, expect a wave of similar claims from disgruntled team principals, technical directors, and senior staff who feel wronged by opaque internal politics." Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The potential financial exposure for Red Bull is staggering. If Horner's legal challenge is successful, the company could be liable for tens of millions in damages, including lost earnings, reputation-related harm, and punitive measures for procedural misconduct. More alarmingly, regulatory sanctions from the FIA are now firmly on the table. These could include financial penalties, loss of constructor points, or even temporary suspension of Red Bull's license to compete, though such measures would require a majority consensus among the FIA's disciplinary committee. What happens next could reshape the future of Formula One in ways few could have anticipated. Will Red Bull attempt to negotiate a private settlement with Horner in exchange for silence? Will the FIA push for criminal proceedings against certain executives if evidence of fraud or willful misconduct emerges? Could this case trigger wider reform, prompting other teams to audit their governance systems before similar accusations emerge? One thing is abundantly clear: the curtain has been pulled back on a power struggle years in the making, and the stage is now set for a legal, political, and sporting battle unlike anything the paddock has seen in decades. The fate of Red Bull Racing, and the legacy of Christian Horner himself, hangs in the balance. What adds an even darker and more unsettling layer to this already shocking narrative is the staggering revelation that Christian Horner's long-term contract with Red Bull Racing contained a complex web of irrevocable retention clauses, highly unusual even by Formula One standards, activated by his pivotal role in securing the 2023 Constructors' Championship and in driving the commercial juggernaut that Red Bull Racing has become under his command. These clauses were not just symbolic gestures of recognition, but deeply entrenched legal protections, deliberately crafted to ensure that Horner could not be removed or marginalized due to internal factional disputes, shifting alliances within the boardroom, or political sabotage from high-ranking members of the parent company. And yet, despite their rigidity and binding legal force, they were allegedly circumvented through a systematic, calculated series of maneuvers that paint a picture not just of internal dissent, but of outright betrayal. According to multiple sources with first-hand knowledge of the situation, Red Bull executives and select board members, acting behind closed doors and, crucially, without full transparency or the required quorum, allegedly greenlit a sequence of manipulated performance reviews, retroactively applied disciplinary memos citing vague code of conduct breaches, and highly confidential votes that lacked procedural legitimacy. These actions appear to have been orchestrated with surgical precision to build a false narrative of underperformance and disruptive behavior, thereby creating a manufactured justification to breach Horner's contract. Legal insiders familiar with high-stakes executive agreements in elite sports institutions describe this maneuver not only as a flagrant violation of contractual norms but potentially criminal in nature. In their view, Horner would not only be entitled to reinstatement under standard arbitration, but may also be due monetary compensation well into the tens of millions of dollars for breach of contract, reputational damage, and emotional distress. Even more shockingly, if intentional misconduct is proven, individual members of Red Bull's management team may face criminal liability under both Austrian corporate law and international labor statutes. What makes the situation even more explosive is the fact that the FIA, an organization often criticized for its sluggish and overly cautious approach to team-level disputes, has stepped in with rare urgency and unfiltered language. In a scathing statement released just hours after leaked documents hit the public domain, the FIA acknowledged what it termed severe procedural breaches and governance failures within Red Bull Racing's handling of the Horner affair. The statement pointedly warned that the integrity of the sport as a global institution was hanging in the balance, and emphasized that if teams are allowed to engage in internal purges based on questionable legal grounds, the entire foundation of the FIA's regulatory authority could be irreparably undermined. It was a declaration that stunned paddock insiders, not just for its timing but for its unmistakable tone. This was no longer a matter of internal HR drama. It had escalated into a global governance crisis. Adding to the intensity of the moment, FIA President Mohammed bin Sulayem is reported to be personally appalled by both the tactics used and the brazenness with which Red Bull executives appeared to operate, despite the known existence of these retention clauses. Sources close to the FIA's ethics committee indicate that bin Sulayem has taken the unprecedented step of convening an emergency ethics tribunal, composed of independent international legal experts, to oversee Red Bull Racing's compliance with not only the FIA's governance code but also broader international labor law. The tribunal is set to begin its inquiry immediately, with full investigatory powers including subpoena rights, document access, and the authority to recommend sanctions ranging from financial penalties to full team suspension, something that has never occurred in the modern era of Formula One. Meanwhile, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, headquartered in Lausanne, Switzerland, has been placed on high alert. The FIA has already submitted preliminary documents requesting that the CAS prepare for a potential emergency hearing. This suggests that the governing body anticipates either Horner or Red Bull, or potentially both, escalating the matter to the highest judicial level in international athletics. Legal observers say this is a clear sign that the stakes have expanded far beyond Horner's personal grievances. This is now a defining moment for how executive contracts are honored, or violated, in a hyper-political, ultra-commercialized world of Formula One. Whispers within the paddock suggest that this ordeal has split allegiances across the sport. While some team principals have expressed quiet solidarity with Horner, fearing that a precedent like this could one day be used against them, others have remained conspicuously silent, unwilling to risk their relationship with Red Bull's commercial power. Behind closed doors, there is increasing anxiety that the scandal could trigger a domino effect, unraveling long-standing sponsorships, destabilizing driver negotiations, and calling into question the governance structures of other top-tier teams. Senior figures at Mercedes and McLaren have allegedly requested closed-door meetings with the FIA to better understand how insulated they are from similar internal coups. This spiraling controversy has now gone beyond Formula One's traditional media channels, capturing the attention of global business outlets, labor rights organizations, and even political bodies. Members of the European Parliament have begun drafting letters requesting clarity on Red Bull's internal practices, particularly concerning compliance with EU labor protections for high-ranking executives. Questions are also being raised about whether Red Bull's parent company may have violated stock market disclosure obligations by failing to report internal governance instability of this magnitude. For Horner himself, the battle has likely just begun. While public appearances have been kept to a minimum, legal teams representing the former team principal are reportedly preparing a multi-pronged strategy, one that includes not only contractual arbitration, but possible civil lawsuits in both Austria and the United Kingdom, and even the pursuit of criminal indictments should evidence of falsified documentation or procedural tampering be substantiated. Confidential sources close to Horner indicate that he feels deeply betrayed, but ready for war. His legal representatives, meanwhile, are said to be combing through years of internal communication, boardroom transcripts, and team performance records to demonstrate a pattern of political sabotage that goes far beyond a simple dismissal. With each passing day, this saga is morphing from a contract dispute into a seismic battle over power, transparency, and ethics in the highest echelons of motorsport. The very pillars of executive protection, team governance, and FIA oversight are now being put to the test in a public global arena. For Red Bull Racing, the consequences could be catastrophic. For the sport of Formula One, the outcome of this battle may very well shape how teams, executives, and governing bodies interact for decades to come. As the FIA's explosive findings sent shockwaves across the Formula One world, Red Bull's executive leadership mobilized with staggering speed and intensity. Within hours of the public announcement, the team lodged a formal appeal, invoking Article 13.5.1 of the FIA's seldom-used procedural charter, a clause historically reserved for moments of extreme contention. The language of the appeal was sharp, bordering on incendiary, accusing the governing body of gross mischaracterization, procedural overreach, and punitive bias against Christian Horner and the organization. But even as Red Bull launched its legal counteroffensive, what's unfolding behind the walls of their state-of-the-art Milton Keynes facility paints a far darker and more fractured picture than any PR statement could hope to mask. The corridors that once echoed with championship celebrations and tireless innovation have become a war zone of silent betrayals, whispered accusations, and deeply personal divides. Sources embedded within Red Bull Racing describe a leadership implosion so severe that it has paralyzed internal operations. A senior team insider, under strict anonymity, described the atmosphere as hostile beyond repair. Helmut Marko, the veteran motorsport advisor long considered Horner's right-hand man and ideological twin, has allegedly pivoted in allegiance, offering discreet support to the interim executives appointed in Horner's absence. This move has sent shockwaves through the engineering divisions, where many still view Horner as an irreplaceable architect of Red Bull's dominance. Multiple lead engineers and at least 3 senior strategists are reportedly in open rebellion, threatening immediate resignation unless the situation is addressed with what they call ethical transparency and contractual justice. These individuals, many of whom have been with Red Bull for over a decade, believe that Horner was ousted without due process, and they are demanding either his reinstatement or a public financial settlement that acknowledges the damage done to his legacy. Legal advisors have taken over several floors of the Milton Keynes compound, poring over internal communications, financial records, regulatory correspondence, and personnel files. Their goal: to construct a bulletproof narrative that either validates the termination or exonerates Horner enough to force a reversal, or at the very least, a high-stakes settlement. Meanwhile, tension has escalated so sharply between departments that the technical team reportedly canceled a scheduled simulator session, citing a compromised working environment and emotional instability among staff members. In one stunning development, a senior HR official was escorted from the building after being accused of leaking sensitive internal memos to media outlets. Trust is at an all-time low, and communication between departments now travels through legal intermediaries rather than direct discussion. In the eye of this storm is Christian Horner himself, a man once praised as the strategic genius behind Red Bull's historic rise to the top of Formula One. Today, he is described as furious, betrayed, and laser-focused on redemption. Friends and confidants close to the embattled former team principal speak of a man oscillating between cold, calculated rage and profound disbelief. Following the FIA's official confirmation of the infractions, which many believe validate Horner's long-standing warnings about internal sabotage, he reportedly retreated to an undisclosed location, cutting off virtually all external communication. He is said to have rejected multiple high-profile interview requests, including a sit-down with the BBC, and ignored calls from former allies within the paddock. One source, present at Red Bull's headquarters when the original termination notice was delivered, claims Horner flew into a blind rage. He allegedly hurled a crystal Red Bull Constructors' Championship trophy against the wall, shattering it into dozens of jagged shards. "They think they can erase me like I'm a footnote in history," he reportedly screamed, pacing furiously around his office before storming out and refusing to attend an emergency board meeting called just hours later. What has emerged in the days since is a campaign, not just of legal defense, but of narrative reclamation. Horner has quietly assembled a team of private advisors, including legal heavyweights, crisis PR veterans, and 2 former team principals from rival constructors who were themselves ousted under controversial circumstances. Together, they are crafting a roadmap not only to challenge the FIA's declarations, but to lay the groundwork for what insiders call the Horner Doctrine, a forthcoming public statement that will expose the internal machinations, power struggles, and coordinated efforts to erase his influence from the Red Bull legacy. If released, it could be the most incendiary manifesto in recent Formula One history, implicating not only Red Bull Racing's boardroom elite, but also a select group of FIA officials whose impartiality has already been questioned in separate investigations. Despite the fallout, murmurs from within the paddock suggest that Horner's absence is being felt in tangible performance-related ways. Data lapses, delayed strategy decisions, and a visible morale drop among pit crew members were observed during a recent test session, prompting speculation about whether the team can maintain its competitive edge under current interim leadership. Furthermore, other teams have begun quietly circling key Red Bull personnel, sensing vulnerability and potential for talent poaching. One rival team principal was overheard remarking, "Whatever happens to Horner, Red Bull just became a feeding ground." Meanwhile, Red Bull's own fanbase is sharply divided. Social media has exploded with hashtags both condemning and defending Horner. Some fans argue that no man is bigger than the team, pointing to the technical brilliance of Adrian Newey and the skill of drivers like Max Verstappen as the true cornerstones of Red Bull's dominance. Others insist that without Horner's visionary leadership and unmatched ability to navigate political warfare within Formula One, the team risks slipping into chaos. Petitions calling for his return have amassed tens of thousands of signatures in mere days. Others demand a full investigation into the decision-making process that led to his dismissal, suspecting corporate sabotage by external stakeholders eager to reshape Red Bull's leadership dynamics. As the battle escalates on multiple fronts, legal, emotional, strategic, Formula One as a whole watches in stunned silence. One paddock veteran put it bluntly, "This isn't just a team crisis. It's a foundational rupture that could reset the entire power structure of the sport." In the coming weeks, depositions will be taken, documents will be subpoenaed, and lawyers will argue over clauses, precedents, and intentions. But outside the boardrooms and courtrooms, one thing remains undeniable. The war for Red Bull's soul has begun, and Christian Horner, whether reinstated or not, refuses to go quietly into the shadows. Horner's legal strategy has taken on a level of sophistication and aggression rarely seen in Formula One's corporate legal history. With a legal arsenal handpicked from top-tier litigation firms across Europe, some of whom have represented world-renowned sports federations, elite athletes, and even controversial doping cases, his defense has grown into an elaborate offensive. The first front of this multifaceted campaign zeroes in on every cent of unpaid contractual compensation. His lawyers are arguing that not only was Horner owed bonuses linked to Red Bull Racing's performance metrics, including world titles, podium finishes, and commercial growth figures, but that his termination has triggered automatic penalty clauses buried deep in his executive contract, clauses that Red Bull may have underestimated or outright ignored in their haste to dismiss him. The financial scope is staggering. Sources familiar with the legal drafts have confirmed that the demands now stretch into the tens of millions, with retroactive interest calculations, breach of contract multipliers, and compensation for opportunity loss from other executive offers Horner allegedly declined due to loyalty. The second and perhaps more incendiary aspect of Horner's counterattack is centered on a defamation claim that has already sent shockwaves through media circles. His legal team alleges that specific individuals within Red Bull's inner executive ring, possibly even with tacit approval from Salzburg, intentionally released incomplete, misleading, and context-stripped internal documentation to select members of the press. These so-called strategic leaks were designed not only to erode Horner's reputation among fans and sponsors, but to manufacture a media narrative that would retroactively justify his removal. What makes this angle explosive is the implication of collusion between corporate executives and third-party media groups, potentially opening the door for subpoenas, email trace logs, and leaked WhatsApp conversations to be introduced in court. Legal analysts are already predicting this defamation case could evolve into a landmark moment in the intersection of Formula One, media ethics, and corporate governance. But it doesn't stop there. The third prong of Horner's assault is pointed directly at Red Bull GmbH, the Austrian parent company. His lawyers are assembling a case under European labor law, accusing Red Bull GmbH of engaging in cross-border employment violations. They argue that as a British executive employed under UK contractual terms but subjected to operational oversight and, ultimately, termination directives from Austria, Horner's legal protections were trampled in the process. They claim this is not merely wrongful dismissal but a calculated breach of transnational employment protocols, wherein the Austrian HQ exercised what they are calling unlawful executive interference. This could set a precedent for how multinational corporations with decentralized governance structures are held accountable for HR decisions that span jurisdictions. The revelations don't end in boardrooms and courtrooms. The legal drama has already pulled in senior Red Bull executives based in Salzburg. Several have been summoned to appear for sworn depositions in London and Vienna. The most startling development came when two high-ranking figures reportedly refused to testify unless granted diplomatic immunity, a legal shield typically reserved for state actors or international representatives. The mere invocation of such a protection suggests there may be national or even governmental entanglements beneath the surface. Rumors are already swirling that one of the executives involved had previous advisory ties to an Austrian political office, a fact that, if true, could amplify the scandal into diplomatic territory. Behind the scenes, the fallout is said to be immense. Red Bull Racing is now dealing with a crisis of leadership, uncertainty among sponsors, and whispers that some team members have begun exploring exit options or pausing contract renewals. Horner's loyalists within the organization, though silent publicly, are reportedly in active communication with his legal representatives, offering corroborating evidence that may dramatically shift the balance of power in ongoing legal negotiations. Meanwhile, the F1 paddock is in turmoil. Team principals are quietly dissecting the ramifications for contractual governance, employee protections, and the unseen influence of parent companies in day-to-day operations. There is talk that the FIA might be pressured to revisit how leadership conflicts and executive discipline are handled within the sport, particularly when such matters risk spiraling into international legal entanglements. In the court of public opinion, the tide is shifting. While some fans still see Horner as a symbol of controversy, others have begun to rally behind him, especially as more legal facts emerge suggesting he may have been the victim of a complex internal coup. Social media sentiment is fluctuating by the hour, with hashtags oscillating between condemnation and support. Pundits are split, with some calling for full transparency from Red Bull GmbH, while others speculate this may have been an orchestrated character assassination from within, a Machiavellian move to consolidate internal power. The legal war is far from over. Each week, new documents surface, new motions are filed, and more names are added to the witness lists. There is speculation that Horner's team is even preparing a secondary lawsuit that could involve breach of fiduciary duty by certain board members, accusing them of putting personal vendettas above corporate responsibility. Confidential sources suggest private investigators have been hired to map out the communications trail that led to the leaked documents, in an effort to build a digital forensics case that could be presented in court. As the situation escalates, Formula One finds itself on the brink of an unprecedented legal saga that could reshape not only Red Bull Racing's legacy, but also the entire corporate structure of motorsport's biggest players. Horner's battle is no longer just about his reputation. It's about control, precedent, justice, and power in a world where billion-dollar teams operate under the microscope of international law and global media scrutiny. The next few months could determine whether he emerges vindicated or buried under a scandal that may consume more than just his career. Publicly, the Formula One universe finds itself split into increasingly antagonistic factions, each louder than the last, amplifying the chaos that has consumed the sport ever since the controversial dismissal of Christian Horner detonated across global headlines like a political scandal. While some teams and drivers have opted for the safety of diplomatic silence, avoiding any incendiary statements that might draw them into the heart of this unfolding storm, others have begun to cautiously break ranks. With thinly veiled remarks, suggestive tones, and carefully calibrated public appearances, prominent figures from rival teams are subtly making their positions known. In a moment that shocked even the most seasoned insiders, Toto Wolff, long regarded as Horner's most consistent and calculating adversary, offered an uncharacteristically compassionate response, stating, "Regardless of rivalries, no one deserves to be treated like that," a line that rippled across the paddock like a whispered secret suddenly shouted into a microphone. Zak Brown, never one to hide behind euphemisms, pointed directly at the systemic implications of the saga, warning that this situation opens a Pandora's box of executive rights in F1 that must be addressed urgently, setting off a new wave of scrutiny not only into Red Bull's corporate dynamics but into the very structure of power, transparency, and accountability at the top of the Formula One hierarchy. What began as a personnel decision is now snowballing into an existential question for the entire sport. Across social media, the storm has reached hurricane force. Hashtags like #JusticeForHorner and #FIATruth aren't just trending. They're dominating digital conversations across platforms from X to TikTok, with millions of fans, influencers, and even ex-team personnel weighing in with commentary, leaks, or wild speculation. The online arena has transformed into a full-blown battleground, with grassroots movements emerging in real time. Boycotts of Red Bull merchandise are gaining traction, and petitions demanding Horner's reinstatement have already amassed hundreds of thousands of signatures, spreading like wildfire through fan communities disillusioned by what they perceive as a cold, calculated corporate move lacking empathy, transparency, and reason. Reddit forums are flooded with frame-by-frame video analyses, dissecting the behavior of Red Bull executives during the weekend of the announcement. TikTok creators are churning out emotionally charged montages of Horner's career highs, intercut with dramatic music and tearful testimonials from longtime fans. Instagram stories are peppered with solidarity images, including the now iconic red cap with the phrase "Christian was right" emblazoned across it, already being reproduced on unofficial merchandise and shipped worldwide in record numbers. Inside Red Bull Racing, the atmosphere has turned glacial. Despite the monumental public pressure and a sharply worded report from the FIA that many described as devastating, inflammatory, and borderline unprecedented, the team appears stubbornly unmoved. Public statements are scarce, and when they do come, they are cryptic at best, defensive at worst. Rather than signaling any intent to reverse course, Red Bull has instead entrenched itself, doubling down on its internal decision-making process and framing the dismissal as the result of a process that had reached, in their words, an irreversible point of no return. That phrase, now circulating in media outlets across the globe, has been widely interpreted as an intentional signal that reconciliation is not on the table. However, behind the scenes, Cracks are beginning to form within the structure that once seemed impenetrable. Sources embedded deep within the Red Bull ecosystem are leaking alarming tidbits that point toward a much deeper fracture, one that could threaten the foundations of the team's operations and its long-term reputation in the sport. Multiple insiders have confirmed that Red Bull's title sponsor, whose name has been withheld from public statements due to legal complexities, is growing increasingly uneasy with the tsunami of toxic publicity surrounding the firing. According to those with intimate knowledge of the sponsor's internal communications, discussions are already underway to re-evaluate the brand's future involvement with the team. Executives are reportedly concerned about massive reputational risk, with some allegedly pushing for contractual clauses to be activated that would allow for an early withdrawal from their multi-million-dollar agreement. The potential exit of such a powerful sponsor could trigger a financial earthquake within the team, undermining not only future development plans but also threatening the very stability of the Red Bull empire's motorsport ambitions. Further compounding the crisis is the internal political turbulence now brewing at the highest levels of the organization. Senior members of the Red Bull Racing Board are, according to multiple whistleblowers, urgently preparing for a series of emergency meetings with the parent company's Austrian shareholders. These sessions, described by one source as last-minute crisis summits, are being designed to address escalating concerns about long-term fallout, public trust erosion, and the potential for long-term sponsorship loss. The boardroom dynamics have grown increasingly combative, with factions forming around competing visions for the future of the team. One group reportedly favors a complete overhaul of leadership to purge the perceived rot and restore credibility, while another camp insists on holding the line, defending the decision to dismiss Horner as not only justifiable but necessary to protect the integrity and future of the brand. The tension is so thick that it said even long-standing allies within the executive team are no longer speaking directly, instead communicating through intermediaries or formal legal counsel. In parallel, whispers of potential legal battles are becoming louder. Several experts suggest that Horner's camp is already assembling a legal team to challenge the circumstances of his dismissal, citing violations of contract, lack of due process, and defamation of character. While no official lawsuit has yet been filed, insiders suggest that settlement talks may be taking place behind closed doors, with Horner allegedly seeking not just financial compensation but a formal public clarification that could restore his reputation in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, journalists and investigative reporters are circling like sharks, preparing exposés that promise to pull back the curtain on years of internal power struggles, alleged corporate espionage, and a culture of silence that has long been whispered about within F1 circles but rarely brought to light with such intensity. All the while, the FIA is watching, silently, tensely, with barely concealed alarm. While the governing body has attempted to remain officially neutral, the severity of their report and the strong language used suggest a growing concern that the Red Bull scandal could metastasize into a sport-wide credibility crisis. Internal documents leaked to certain media outlets hint at the possibility of broader reforms being quietly drafted, including stricter oversight of team governance, mandatory transparency audits, and a new independent ethics committee with enforcement power. Such reforms, if implemented, would represent the most dramatic shift in the governance of Formula One since the Concord Agreement era. Already, some teams are preparing for that eventuality, with legal and compliance departments working overtime to ensure they remain ahead of whatever seismic changes might emerge from the current firestorm. And through it all, the one voice that remains conspicuously absent is Christian Horner's. Since his last public statement, brief, stoic, almost cryptic in tone, he has vanished from the spotlight. No new comments, no interviews, no social media presence. Some suggest he is regrouping, planning a strategic re-entry. Others believe he may be preparing to retire from the sport altogether, disillusioned and betrayed. But whether Horner speaks again or not, his absence now echoes louder than any press release. It has become symbolic of a much deeper unease, a sense that the old order of Formula One is beginning to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions, and that something seismic, unpredictable, and possibly irreversible has just been set in motion. As Formula One inches closer to the next Grand Prix, a cloud of uncertainty and tension hangs over the paddock, one that no car upgrade, no qualifying lap, no strategic masterstroke can dissipate. The air is thick not with the scent of burning rubber or the adrenaline of pure racing anticipation, but with suspicion, legal wrangling, and whispered conversations behind tightly shut motorhome doors. At the heart of this maelstrom stands Christian Horner, the long-standing principal of Red Bull Racing, whose reputation and authority have come under a kind of scrutiny that the sport has rarely, if ever, witnessed at such an executive level. What once seemed like an unshakable dynasty, fueled by Verstappen's dominance, Red Bull's near perfection, and Horner's own strategic acumen, now teeters on the edge of a corporate and moral cliff. The initial announcement by the FIA didn't just send shockwaves through Milton Keynes. It sent ripples across every single garage and boardroom in the paddock. The governing body's declaration wasn't just a cold procedural update, it was a cannon blast that shattered the illusion of executive invincibility. For a sport that has historically tolerated the eccentricities and opaque dealings of its top brass, this move represented something tectonic. Overnight, Christian Horner went from being the charismatic face of modern Formula One success to a man suspended in a very public, very uncomfortable purgatory. The fact that this legal battle isn't centered on a driver contract, budget cap violation, or a technical infringement, but on alleged ethical misconduct at the highest level of team leadership, makes it all the more incendiary. The whispers began cautiously. Was it just a political move? An internal coup? A power struggle within Red Bull's expansive empire stretching beyond the racetrack into its energy drink conglomerate and boardroom politics in Austria and Thailand? But those whispers have now turned into open speculation. And that speculation has taken on a life of its own, feeding journalists, inflaming fan theories, and placing every team boss under a magnifying glass they never signed up for. More than one team principal has privately admitted that the Horner situation has them re-evaluating internal protocols, HR procedures, and the real meaning of corporate transparency. It's no longer just about Horner. It's about the system that made someone like Horner so powerful, so untouchable, and perhaps so unaccountable. Inside the Red Bull garage, the tension is palpable. While the team continues to dominate on the track, there's an unmistakable unease within the organization. Engineers, mechanics, and junior staffers move with the efficiency of a championship team, but their eyes betray a deep anxiety. Verstappen, laser-focused as ever, refuses to comment, but insiders suggest that even he is privately disturbed by the scale of the unfolding scandal. The Dutch driver may be the beating heart of Red Bull's on-track success, but Horner has long been its architect, the political strategist who battled rivals, wooed sponsors, and built the empire that Max now leads. If that architect falls, the foundations themselves might begin to tremble. What's most arresting is how this has triggered a chain reaction that goes far beyond Red Bull. Sponsors are suddenly asking harder questions. Board members at rival teams are pushing for compliance audits. The old Formula One, where powerful figures operated with impunity, where the paddock's darker corners were ignored in favor of on-track brilliance, appears to be under siege. And there is no putting the genie back in the bottle. The new generation of fans, media, and employees are far less tolerant of ambiguity. They demand transparency, accountability, and justice, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it isn't. And then there's the FIA, caught between its responsibility as a governing body and the politically explosive nature of this particular case. Some argue they've acted boldly. Others suggest they've been far too slow. But one thing is certain, they've crossed a line that may alter the sport's power dynamics forever. By publicly addressing the matter, the FIA has, intentionally or not, set a precedent that future leaders will have to reckon with. This is not merely about punishing wrongdoing. It is about reshaping the culture of leadership in Formula One itself. About signaling that team bosses are not kings, and that success on the track does not absolve anyone from scrutiny or consequence. Behind the scenes, lawyers on both sides are preparing for a battle that could drag on far longer than any race season. Contracts, NDAs, internal communications, everything is now evidence. Every past decision, every ignored complaint, every out-of-court settlement that once might have disappeared into silence is now potentially a liability. It's not just about what happened, it's about how it was handled, who knew, and who looked away. Red Bull's legal team, fiercely protective and deeply experienced, is working overtime. But so are the watchdogs, the whistleblowers, and those who believe the truth must come to light regardless of the cost. This is no longer just a scandal. It is a moment of reckoning. One that has arrived at a time when the sport, paradoxically, is more popular than ever. The Netflix era has made the stars of Formula One household names. But it has also opened the doors to a new kind of fan, one that doesn't just cheer for pole positions but demands ethical integrity, fair treatment, and an end to the old boys club mentality that once defined the paddock. Christian Horner's case is merely the spark. What burns next remains to be seen. And amid all this chaos, Formula One must go on. The teams will travel. The races will continue. The champagne will flow on Sunday afternoons. But underneath the podium celebrations, something deeper is shifting. This isn't just about Horner. It's about a sport at a crossroads, torn between its dazzling spectacle and the murky realities of its inner workings. What happens next won't just define one man's legacy. It might redefine what it means to lead in the world of Formula One altogether.